So I've spent about 11 hours over the past 2 days trying to find a way to make an Overpower Necromancer build work. And the TLDR of that is, we kind of did it. There's like a pretty cool Death Speaker Blood Surge Necromancer that I'm going to get done and build it up and optimizing and get that updated on Maxwell. So look forward to that, within the coming week or so. But here's the problem. While we were hanging out, a member from chat wanted me to double check on something that another content creator was looking at. That's Nguyen. I just want to go ahead and give them their full credit for this. I didn't discover this. I didn't start by testing this. This is them right there. Go give them some love. It's spelled like that. You can kind of see it. When they first brought it to my attention, I went, well, of course not. That's not how it works. But what am I talking about? Well, Overpower does not critically strike. Now, I hear what you're saying. I've also read the tooltip that says that yellow numbers are crits and blue numbers are overpowers and orange numbers are overpower crits, right? What are you talking about, Mac? Of course overpower critically strikes. It doesn't. It just doesn't. It's actually one of the reasons why overpower is so difficult to scale and why I've had so much trouble trying to make it work on the Necromancer. I've actually gone through and created this giant data sheet to try to figure out exactly what happens with Overpower. The calculations end up being fairly simple because basically nothing works with it. Oddly enough, your imperfectly balanced skill works with it, blood skill damage works with it, overpower damage works with it. Skill ranks actually don't increase the damage even though the tooltip says that it should. It's based off of the original skill damage rather than the rank damage. Cadaverous aspect doesn't work, inner column doesn't work, core skill damage. You know how you can use a core skill to overpower? Well, that doesn't increase overpower damage. Also, intelligence, increasing the base skill damage, doesn't increase overpower damage. Basically, nothing works with this thing, except for this aspect. This is Grasping Veins. Grasping Veins is a really good critical strike damage tool. It says when you successfully cast Corpse Tendrils, you gain 40% critical strike. That's pretty nice, right? Just crit more often. It's the second part that seems to be the culprit in what's happening here, which says that it says you deal 120% multiplicative additional critical strike damage to monsters who have been damaged by Corpse Tendrils. How does the game recognize whether or not the monster's been damaged by it? Well, it happens on the second part of Corpse Tendrils. So when you first cast Corpse Tendrils, you get the critical strike modifier and it rolls out and applies its slow. And then when it pulls monsters in is when it actually deals its damage. So as a quick note, if you've been running Bone Spear or Bone Spirit and sometimes your crits just don't seem like as consistent as you think they should be, it's because you're probably not waiting for the Corpse Tendrils to actually do the pull effect. This is also when it applies vulnerable, but that's a completely different topic. But it's the fact that dealing the damage to the target is seemingly applying a 6-second long debuff that says that they receive additional critical strike damage equal to this modifier. And for whatever reason, that's making the overpowered damage read the critical strike damage modifier and get increased. So that was a whole bunch of words. Let me just very quickly show it to you. And again, for the people who are going to say, Overpower absolutely crits, I get orange numbers all the time, what are you talking about? Let me just show you a quick still from when we were testing this initially. So right here, we're using the first part of Blood Surge's damage to be able to calculate our overpower damage. You'll see we're still in the beginning of the animation. This is the part that does the drain effect. It does a lot less damage than the base damage. And you'll see that my overpower damage is 27,000. It's basically nothing from the base skill and then a bunch of modifiers for overpower because I have like 400 or 500 overpower damage at this point. And you'll see that there's the orange number. That's the critical strike overpower damage. And you'll notice that it isn't double the damage of my overpower. I have a lot more than 120% critical strike damage, but let's just say critical strikes are double damage. There's no way for my base overpower damage to be 27,000 and a critical strike of that overpower damage only gaining about 4,000 damage. And it's because the base damage, like the actual skill damage itself, is the part that typically critically strikes and gains any benefits from that. The overpower damage is a complete, separate, single added on value to your overall damage before vulnerable applies. Also, a bunch of people were telling me that vulnerable doesn't apply to overpower. It completely does. It's like very simple to actually go test that. Use Corpse Tendrils, apply the vulnerable, check your overpower damage before, check your overpower damage on the second one. But I just wanted to show you this. It would literally be impossible for this damage to be double my overpower damage and only gain 4,000. So now let's go ahead and try to reproduce what I was talking about just so you can see it, because this is a bug. This should not be happening. We're going to use this really small sword here so that basically all of the damage you're going to see when I overpower is pure overpower damage. Just so you can get an idea of what like the base damage should be, and then we can very quickly run through the math. But you'll notice that my skill damage is 100 and my overpower damage should put it somewhere around like 20,000. So let's just very quickly go out and do that. We'll wait for Rathmas to tick up so we can get the automatic overpower, and we only care about the damage off the first part, the initial surge, because the secondary surge has different modifiers that are based off of how many people you drain from, and we don't really want to worry about that right now. We also have the Scent of Death board, so that means that if there are no corpses around us, we do increased damage. That also doesn't apply to overpower. That also only applies to the base damage. But here we go. We got some spiderlings, and we do a big damage there. And you'll notice that my overpower damage was about 24,000, and my crit overpower damage was about 24,000 damage. So just again, literally doesn't apply crit. I'm just glad that it showed it right there. But we have that. That's pretty simple. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put on a weapon that has the actual grasping veins aspect on it. Now obviously the weapon itself has a huge amount of damage, and then if you look at the base skill damage of the weapon, we're going to be doing about 3,000 to 4,000, which should also be multiplied by about 3 before the secondary modifier here. So we're also going to see an increase there, but I just want to be able to account for those numbers for when you see them so you don't think any shenanigans are going on. Alrighty, so we just have to wait for Rathma's Vigor to be up. This is absolutely my personal favorite part about utilizing Blood Surge. And we do this. And you'll notice that my initial damage just dealt 71,000 damage. Now 71,000 damage is a lot more than 24,000 damage. And that's not how Overpower is supposed to work at all. You are not supposed to be critting off of Overpower. Overpower damage on attacks which have crit are reading the bonus, and that's just not intended. Now, this could be left in the game, right? It could be something that's left in the game. Obviously, it's not supposed to be in the game, and it might generally make Overpower builds better. One of my biggest issues when I started testing blood builds in general was just how poorly they actually performed. They just weren't good. We got to the point where I realized that Bloodlance's damage was so inconsequential to the overpower damage, and the fact that putting ranks into the base skill wasn't increasing my overpower damage, that I made an entire build that was based off of max attack speed, max lucky strike, literally only putting a single point into the actual skill Bloodlance, and then only scaling overpower, and basically using that as like a proc engine for a summons build. And that was one of the few ways that I could get Bloodlance to work in general at all. Now, luckily for us, Blood Surge is actually a good skill to start, and then the addition of the overpower damage can make it perform well enough that it can kind of push a bit further than most other blood builds. I didn't necessarily set out to use this video as an opportunity to discuss what I consider to be the current failures of the overpower system, but the amount of restriction that goes into what does and does not work with overpower, while simultaneously the amount of options and investment for overpower damage in your Paragon boards is just completely desynchronous. The amount that you would have to put into your boards to be able to fully max out all of your overpower means that you have to completely sacrifice any other good damage modifiers, since overpower doesn't work with them. This right here, damage to injured enemies, doesn't work with overpower damage. Straight out flat damage from your initial board does not work with overpower damage. None of these things actually increase it. Damage to close enemies, damage to core skills, if you're using a core skill for the overpower, damage to distant enemies, none of those things work with overpower. And what it basically means is that as a gimmick, it's kind of a fun thing to use. As a Blood Surge Necromancer, I'm now fully reliant on summons to be able to tank and do any damage at all, while I wait for my Rathma's Vigor passive, as well as being able to spam cast the actual skill itself 5 times before I can benefit from a legendary node in my Paragon boards, a ton of rare nodes and glyphs that I've put into my Paragon boards that just don't work for the other 5 to 10 seconds of any fight. So while this video is one part just bringing to light the bug in general and the fact that it currently works, and Hell, until like they take it out, I mean, throw Grasping Veins onto any one of your blood builds and absolutely enjoy the increased critical strike chance on your Overpower. Use it while you can, because I doubt it's going to make it very long in the game. But maybe this helps to bring to light like just how underperforming the Overpower mechanism is in general. And this might be a Necromancer only issue, because the Necromancer really doesn't have altogether that many ways of enabling Overpower. I don't know if you've ever actually really looked in the skill tree and looked at the term Overpower, but Bloodlance overpowers on the 9th cast of Bloodlance, 1 every 9 casts. Blood Surge overpowers on every 6th cast of this skill. If you happen to overpower, you can decrease the cooldown of Blood Mist. You can slightly increase overpower damage here. And Rathma's Vigor says you have to be healthy for 15 total seconds to overpower once on demand. And then, just because I think this is a little bit throwing salt in the wounds, the Bloodbath Legendary node, the Paragon board about overpowering and just increasing your overall overpower damage, says that only attacks that are guaranteed to overpower gain a 50% damage increase. So even if you happen to hit the 3% base chance, which cannot be increased, I don't know if you've ever gone and read this, but the overpower chance is 3%, which cannot be increased by any means in the game. If you happen to overpower 3% of the time, you just get lucky. That node literally does not increase your damage because it wasn't a guaranteed overpower. Again, thank you to Nguyen. I in no way, shape, or form discovered this, and I had no intention of testing it, so I think it's really cool. I'm glad that other people out there like super theory crafting. That's awesome. But also, can we do something about Overpower, at least on the Necromancer? Like, half of her identity is being a blood mage and being able to do this cool Overpower thing, and you gotta wait 15 seconds to make it happen, or cast 9 spells, or cast 6 spells. That's all I got. Thank you very much for watching this video. I hope that it helped, or at the very least, I hope you found it entertaining, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.